understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. I am excited today. I have my main guy here, Dan Robertson, product manager extraordinaire. And what we're going to be talking about today is going from concept to launch within the FinTech sphere and product management. What does all that mean? Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Namdi. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, man, it's great to be talking to you. Dan and I used to work together. We used to have great conversations. So this is like reminding me of back then when we had our conversations. But now a lot of people are watching. That's the only difference. And of course, it's a historical record of it. So that's the only difference. Let me do some housekeeping stuff first. We are streaming live from Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch. We also have a stream going on Instagram. Those on Instagram, you're welcome to keep watching it through that portal, or you can hop on the Tech Behind FinTech, click on a link to watch, and you can be part of the show, and your comments are part of the show, but feel free to stay on Instagram if you're comfortable with that. So I think that's all the housekeeping stuff that needs to be done. Once again, today's episode, from concept to launch, the FinTech Product Journey. So that being said, even though I know Dan very well, I still have to do him justice and read his bio so you guys get to know him a little bit better. Dan Robertson, a seasoned product leader, excels at simplifying complex challenges to benefit customers, developers, and end users. His career began at a startup he founded during college, transitioning to Nike, where he managed global digital products from omni-channel payments and led product management for commerce platform APIs. Later, as head of product in the early stage startup in the banking analytics realm, he spearheaded a successful 0-to-1 product pivot. He's deeply interested in the transformative potential of decentralized ID tech on FinTech, a topic he explores through his Product Intuition blog and Substack. Dan's diverse experiences across startups in the Fortune 100 have honed his knack for cutting through complexity to deliver simple and valuable solutions to the market. Love that bio, by the way. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's wild to hear. I don't usually walk around saying that to myself. So.
Who does that? Like, look in the mirror and just start reading your bio when you start feeling about yourself.
Yeah, maybe I should. Not on camera, but
I know, right? Like, hell, I might start doing that. You know, I have my up and down days. I might just like go in the mirror and read. But if you do it, you have to like read your bio in a different voice, so it can sound like somebody else.
have some kind of AI have like William Shatner read it to you or something.
Dude, I think I might do that. And it has to be like a James Earl Jones voice.
Yep.
Definitely get some AI bot to do it and like read my bio. Totally gonna do that. I'm gonna own that. Today's episode, right? And this is something that kind of fascinates me. And when I do these shows, it really stems from like a question that I want to ask and a question our audience may have, is that concept of like going from concept and I firsthand seen you do that, right? Especially with the bio, with the product pivot, right? I was part of that process that we went through in terms of having one direction, totally pivoting and going in a new direction. From a product management standpoint, can you describe that? How does that work?
Yeah, so like, I guess kind of my not quite mantra, not quite shtick, but sort of my perspective when talking about product is there's so many smart people that are sort of putting forward a playbook. Like, this is how you do product management. Like names like Marty Kagan is a huge one. And like there's a number of folks that sort of business authors. There's Eric Ries wrote The Lean Startup, and it's like there is all of these sort of like, well, here's how I think about it, here's how I've done it and been successful. And I spend time on Reddit in the product management subreddit, and I've sort of heard the frustration of people who are actually at different companies, and they read these books or they listen to these podcasts or they watch YouTube videos, and they sort of find frustration in like, you're giving me this playbook and I try to run it and it's all going poorly. And so my thing is, item one, it depends, which is often sort of a trope in product management communities, is like someone asks, how should I do X? And then first comment is, it depends. And it's like, to some extent it's true across life, but especially with product management, because and I mean, it extends to other functions, right? Including like engineering and design. But when you're building digital products, you're building because it doesn't exist. Does that make sense? Like, if like for houses, you might build the same house like, a dozen different times in a new development. It's just the same house, right? With a different paint color. So you're doing the same things over and over because it doesn't matter that one house exists. You can't have everybody live in one house. So you need to keep building houses. But with digital products, if it's been built, okay, then we have that, right? So we're only building because it doesn't exist. So you're constantly in this state of figuring it out. And how to figure it out depends on your context. It depends on what stage is your company at, what industry are you in, what are your strategic objectives, what is your culture, who are your leaders, how is does product roll up into CTO, or is there a chief product officer who's peer to the CEO? Like, what are all of the dynamics? Who's on your team? Who are you building with? What are their strengths? And so it's I feel like that's sort of the baseline, is to go in knowing we're not going to find a book that tells us do steps A, B, C, and D, and then you've got the product you needed, because no one's done it, right? And so that's sort of my starting point. And I've sort of developed that over a kind of, you read my bio. I've been in all of these different contexts. I've worked on back-end platforms and APIs, and I've worked on mobile apps, and I've worked on the data platform, B2B, B2C, all of these things. And everywhere I've been, I've done things differently because it just called for something different. And so that's sort of like, it's a frustrating answer, right? Because it's like, but tell me how. And it's like, so what I say is, you just have to live with the fact that it depends and accept that it's your job to discern what it depends on, right? What are the factors I need to look at, and where are they pointing me in terms of what to do and how to do it? Does that make sense?
No, look, those who know me personally and watch the show know I make a lot of references to combat sports, because I that's one of the things one of my hobbies that I actually really, really enjoy in terms of like jujitsu. But in boxing, right? Favorite quote of all time that could be applied to everything. You know what I'm about to say, Dan? Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? So, when you were talking, that's what I was thinking about. But maybe we went a little bit too fast. Can you help the audience out, like those who are not familiar? What is product manager? Like, who is a product manager in the realm of this startup or established company? Like, what is that role?
Yeah, so product management typically would be a function. I think it's a function that's occurring whether there's someone with that title or not, right? Like, you might, there's certain like mobile apps where it's like, it's just one person and they write the code, they decide what it should be, how it should work, they decide how it'll look, they take the screenshots, they put it in the app store, they make the website, they handle the support. There's no one in that one person organization whose title is product manager, but they're managing a product, right? It can really vary in sort of what is in scope depending on what the product is. So in a lot of cases, software that is the product of your work goes into the market and people pay to use it. Or, if it's an advertising based business model, then they don't pay to use it, but advertisers pay to put ads into the product. And then there's other cases where there might be a product management title, but it's really, in a lot of ways, it's a different set of responsibilities. If the product of your work doesn't go into the market and instead is serving some sort of internal function, like it's used by the back office in your own company, or sort of an in-between would be like a role that I was in for a while, where it was an internal development platform, like a set of APIs for internal developers to use. So it was sort of in the middle ground between sort of only our company uses it or it goes out to the market. It was like, well, it enables our user-facing products. So so product management is easiest to distill down to what to build and why, right? A common way of a couple common frameworks are design, engineering, and business overlay on like a Venn diagram, where that center point is product management. Like you need to engage with partners and understand enough of the technology. On the engineering side, you need to engage with partners and understand enough about design to get the experience right. And then you also need to understand what your business is trying to accomplish and how to serve the market, what customers want, what they'll pay for. And so that's one model to think about it. And but I think what to build and why is sort of the crux of it. And I think that the thing that gets overlooked by a lot of folks, I sort of, it's in fact the tagline of my blog. There are no requirements. I sort of loathe the word requirements because it comes from this model of some magical all-knowing person is going to tell everyone else this is required. And if we build what's required, then we've succeeded. And I hate it because one, it's like, it feels like hubris that I or anyone else would come in saying, I know what's required, do this and we will succeed. But it also carries a big liability where you turn off the creativity of partners on your team that know things you don't know and have skills that you don't have. And Marty Kagan, who I mentioned earlier, and I don't mean to be disparaging of like what he teaches, because I think he's a really good thinker and he has a lot of experience. It's just a question of discerning how and when to apply what he has to say. But he uses a metaphor of cooking, like you're in the kitchen, and requirements are sort of like a recipe, and the recipe is good only if the context suits it. So you can look up a recipe or pull open a cookbook and say, okay, here's the recipe. But if you don't have eggs and the recipe calls for eggs, then it's not that good of a recipe in your context, right? And so having that expertise, having sort of the person on your team who can say, well, you know what, we don't have eggs, but actually we could substitute these other two ingredients and that would stand in its place. And if we're doing that, if we added a little cinnamon, that would really pop. Like, so you pull in, if you can pull in the brilliance of team members that have different experiences, different knowledge, different skills, and sort of bring all of that to the table, you have a much higher chance, I think, of winning. Because there's been cases where an engineer says, you know, if we do it that way, it's probably going to take 3 to 4 weeks. Would it work as well? Like, how close would we be if we did it this other way instead? Would that get us where we're trying to go? Because that would take like a couple days. And so that's like this notion of requirements. It really just sort of cuts off a lot of optionality where there might be something better, but you're coming in saying, well, these are the requirements. As if, you know, like as if you've come down from the mountain with stone tablets, like this shall be. And it's like, who could say that, right? I mean, one example I like is Steve Jobs, when the iPhone launched, insisted, no, you don't need mobile, you don't need native applications on this device, you just use the web. And now we look back and like a giant share of Apple's revenue comes through the app store, and it's like it's a must do to build a mobile app if you're launching so many kinds of products. And it's like, okay, if even Steve Jobs, like arguably the greatest product person of a generation, like maybe ever of the modern age, if he didn't actually understand what's required in that critical case, like what do the rest of us think we're doing, like running around saying, oh, here, I wrote some stuff down, this is required.
It's like so much to unpack. Said a lot, and I love it because it's like so many different questions now going over my head. But we always try to give precedent to the audience who asks questions, and we have a question from one of our viewers, Phil. Let's pop it up. What about strategy based on research?
Yeah, I think again, I'll go back to it depends, but definitely research is a valuable tool to pull from in a lot of contexts. And what that research looks like is going to depend on all those different factors we discussed, right? So if you are building some kind of back office tool, then that research is going to be maybe looking at third-party offerings from vendors in the marketplace to sort of say, okay, well, they're able to do X and Y and Z. Is that stuff we should consider? Would we get value out of that? Or maybe there's a different way to look at those. And then it's going back. I mean, ultimately, who you care about is who is using the product and who's buying the product. And on the consumer side, that's typically the same person. On the B2B side, once you get into enterprise sales, that's often different. Like you might be selling to a VP or a C-level person who's actually going to write the check, but then it's people sort of on their team that are the users. So yeah, I think there are lots of kinds of research: user research, market research, competitive research, and I think that they all are potentially valuable. And that's sort of the challenge of product, is to figure out, okay, like we can't spend 3 years doing every kind of research in depth because the world will pass us by. And so it's figuring out, okay, like which hills have the gold in them, and let's try to focus on those, and being ready to pivot when we're realizing, okay, there's not as much here as I thought. What other levers can we pull to better understand kind of, I like to talk about reality as sort of this like personified character, where reality sort of knows everything and you're trying to make a deal with reality. And he sits on the other side of the table, doesn't say a word, lets you propose any deal you want, and you never know until you try to go make it happen whether you're actually going to get back in return what you hoped for. And so understanding what's going on in reality's head, because he knows everything, is the closer you get to understanding all of that, the better deal you can try to make in terms of, we're going to spend X amount of time, we're going to have this many people working on it, we're going to take this particular set of scope, these features with this kind of shape and functionality, we're going to take that to market. And so that's why I think it's so critical to bring in other partners that have other skills, other experiences, other expertise, because they help you to make a better offer, quote unquote, when you're doing that negotiation with reality on like what you're going to offer forward and what you hope to get back in return.
No, that sounds good. We have another question from Instagram from my guy, David. Okay. The question is, aren't some requirements necessary? What if the audience is allergic to eggs and that is the requirement?
Yeah, that is certainly the case sometimes. I think the cases, at least some of the cases where requirements become more relevant, would be things like compliance. So, in a prior role, I worked on bringing my scope into compliance with GDPR in the EU. And that's a case of, it's pretty fair to call that requirements. Like, we need to be able to delete profiles at the request of the user within 30 days. And we need to do X, Y, and Z. Another case would be tax would be a flavor of that. Like if you're selling things and there are sales tax or VAT in VAT in other in most of the world, that would be another case of, okay, well, we have laws that dictate this is required. There are exceptions to that. There was a case, I think it was maybe in the Netherlands, where Apple chose not to comply with a particular piece of legislation and just pay the fine on sort of a ongoing basis. So it was like, that's a case where, okay, there's legislation where it's actually, we're deciding it's not a requirement to be in compliance with it because the fine is not enough of a needle mover for us to make a change. So it, again, it's judgment calls. I think security is another case where it's, and we're talking obviously through a FinTech lens. I think FinTech, that's something that differentiates FinTech is the heightened priority around security. Because if you're dealing with people's money and people's financial data, that's something they probably care a lot more about than their grocery list or whatever sort of counterexample you'd want to choose, where maybe security is not as high of a priority. So yeah, there are cases where, for whatever reason, another one would be dependencies. So if you're going to have 2, 3, 15 different teams all working toward the same outcome or deliverables, and there's dependencies between those teams and the parts of the system that each one owns, then it's going to be very difficult for everyone to just sort of be flowing with the wind, because team A is saying, I need you, team B, to deliver me something I can integrate with in order for us to all move forward together. So that would be another case where we maybe need to call something required, because it might be sort of a contract between those two teams. Like, we both need to have the direction to head. We both need to know what's going on. So we're going to make decisions more firmly and more quickly or earlier in the process so that we can move together. So there's cases where there really are requirements, and that's why I like to reserve the word for,
to that. So in understanding everything you're saying, right? Like, obviously, everybody in the show knows, look at the LinkedIn, I'm into the security realm of it. And I know, so we do like some threat modeling early on in the stage. We're going to come out with certain security requirements that are going to go in the backlog. Those are like, all right, kind of fixed. Like, guys, we need to have these things in, or we have a huge potential risk of getting breached and getting our data compromised. All right, hard and fast. When I heard you say no requirements, I was thinking more around the business side of it. More of, all right, this is what we're trying to bring. I like what you said earlier. You're trying to create something that does not exist right now. All you have is an idea, and saying, you know what? We think this idea can be of value to our end user. That end user is an external or internal consumer of said product, right? So it's hard to have requirements based on something. Another thought with your Greece and the lean startup, right? So it's and work with me on this, because this is I'm as you're talking, I'm also kind of thinking through some stuff. It's also getting constant feedback. So what is the quickest path to create something tangible so your end consumer can see it, so you can get a feedback loop, right? So similar concept to your cooking analogy, right? You cooked something, it's basic. You say, you know what? Can you taste this? Tasted it. You know what? I think it needs a little bit more pepper. All right, cool, put the pepper. I think it needs a little bit more. So you're getting feedback as you're creating the thing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and that is another case of it depends, and it's sort of like compiling all of the, look, like, you don't ignore the different frameworks and playbooks. You sort of want to take them in, understand them, and understand why and when they would work, and then know that you can pull from those, right? You go to the store, you pick up a hammer. That's going to be useful when you need to drive nails, but it's not going to be useful when you need to drive screws. And so I think of all of those as sort of tools that once you have it, okay, great, now we can pull from that if it suits what we need to accomplish. But we're going to cause ourselves a lot of frustration if we always pull the same tool, regardless of sort of what the task is in front of us. And I think, to use an example, you like from when we've worked together, the term that Lean Startup uses is minimum viable product, or MVP. And a lot of people will call sort of just the first version of whatever the thing is the MVP. But the way that the book presents it is the MVP is not actually maybe the first version of the thing you'll go to market with. It's the smallest thing that you can do that sort of, hey, does this need more salt? Hey, what do you think of this? Does the cinnamon and chocolate work together, or should I drop the cinnamon? Like and so in sort of the pivot that you and I were both involved in, that was not working software. That was literally a PDF document that spelled out the results of some SQL queries that someone had run ad hoc, right? It was like, we didn't build anything. We wrote some SQL queries and we sort of typed up a document. And it went in front of, a certain audience, and we got some feedback. And ultimately it was like, okay, I want to say that was sort of for like a potential partnership or something. It wasn't even pitching like the target customer, but in that process and sort of the stakeholders involved who had a lot of expertise and were able to sort of represent the customer's perspective because of their background. It was like, okay, this thing that we just did speculatively, like this is actually it. And that was evident without building any software. And so that's one way that might look. Another option is like Wizard of Oz type experiments, where you, by some means, you make it look like it's working software when really it's just like someone checking, like a Google sheet or something. Like you sort of wire together some sort of thing where it's like the person is experiencing what the working software would feel like, but you haven't, translation. Like you could potentially Wizard of Oz test a translation product by just having someone who knows the language you're translating and just look at the thing, type back the translation. We'll worry about being able to actually do the translation programmatically later if this is working. You know what I mean? So I think having the experience, having the knowledge of what tools are at your disposal, and then assessing the situation and saying, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What's our context look like? Okay, what's the next best thing to move towards the understanding we need or the confidence that we need?
I mean, it's a very interesting thought process, right? Because like that's I think the biggest struggle from people looking at product management from outside in, from other teams. It's just like the challenge is like, all right, what you said, it depends. Like we're trying to create this. So how do we get from point 0 or point A to Z? Like what are the steps involved? Like what you said, it depends. Switching gears, because you said something earlier, right? Where your product manager report to a CPO, CTO, or different things. So I remember this example with Experian during their breach, right? During their breach, I think from the story, the chief security officer was reporting to like the CTO or the chief technology officer. And a lot of things came out after the breach back in the days. I think it was like I forget the year, but after they moved past that, now the CTO and the CISO are now both reporting to the CEO in a new structure, and they revamped their entire security team and made great strides, right? And put a lot of industry templates that others can leverage. What do you feel the difference in your experience and when product manager is reporting to a CTO versus product manager reporting to a chief product officer who then has direct access to a CEO. What's the difference?
Yeah, I think that would depend a lot on sort of the company culture and the personalities involved. The bigger a company gets, probably the more that matters, the more impact that will have, because of the way incentives sort of shift as you move from, we've got some n number of months to figure this out, or we're out of cash and we're out of business. But if we can, we're all going to be rich because we're going to sell to Google for $300 million. Like, so that early stage incentive structure sort of, no matter what the hierarchy is or who reports to who, it sort of levels everything out, because everyone's just like, let's just get to the next milestone. Let's drive this outcome. We're all going to be big winners if we do. You get to the far end of the spectrum of like a Fortune 100 company that's been publicly traded for 35 years. And now the incentives are all about sort of, I'm trying to remember the term. I think it's the book Loon Shots, where he talks about perks of rank become sort of the incentives for that later stage of an enterprise, where I want a title, I want a bonus, I want more headcount in my organization, I want to not get fired. Like, moving the 10% growth, 15% growth in the next fiscal year isn't, for me as whoever in whatever role, isn't really going to make a big difference. I care about not getting fired, getting my bonus. If I can, like, it's actually becomes, if I can try to justify more headcount in my team or organization, then that becomes justification for me to be promoted to a higher title, and that'll come with a salary increase. So the incentives change. Politics become a lot more important as you move along that maturity spectrum as an organization. And so I think that's where it can really depend. Ideally, it wouldn't depend, right? Ideally, everyone is saying, we're going to optimize for the organization's success and for the success of our customers. And I'm not going to worry about me and my spot that I sit in and how to angle for a slightly better spot at the expense of the company. But if that's happening, then it becomes a lot more important who's reporting to who and all of that.
Organizations are, look, in security, right? We always say that the biggest threat is inside threat, right? It's just one of those things. Organizations are made up of individuals. Sometimes individuals have their own incentives and thought process. Not everyone thinks alike. Everyone comes with their own varied set of experiences. So totally understand what you're saying in that. So that's my thought process. You mentioned the Venn diagram earlier, right? Right. You had all these different roles, and then you had product management in the middle. How do you foster effective communication between those roles? Let's go over the roles. Help me out here. We have engineers. We have potentially, depending on the size of the organization and what you're working on at the time, you may have the CEO interaction. If it's a big organization, he may not be as involved. You obviously, you have, give me some other titles you have. We've talked about security in a sense, right? Because, we have requirements that come from the security side. What are some other, once we get all these potential roles you have to interact with, it's a question coming after that. So help me out with the roles.
Yeah. So in the classic sort of Venn diagram to describe product management, it's engineering and design and quote business, right? Which is obviously a broad, and that sort of speaks to the intersection of the skills and knowledge needed to build the product, like to do the building. So beyond that, though, you're hitting on a lot of other stakeholders and partners that aren't in that diagram, but often are really relevant, right? So there's potentially marketing, sales, customer success or customer support, operations, finance. That list can really get quite long depending on what the product is and what the business is like. And to your point, in a smaller company that, probably the CEO is involved in potentially some day-to-day stuff, which wouldn't be true at a bigger company on some particular product in the portfolio. There are a lot of functions. Which ones exist, which ones matter, how much, that all depends on the context, and it's, you sort of have to discern that. But does that tee up your question?
Yeah. So let's focus on those three, right? The business, design, and engineering, right? How you're sitting in the middle, how do you foster effective communication between those roles? Like, how does that process work?
Yeah. So I step 0 for me, if I'm joining an organization or changing to a new team, or whenever someone comes in new to a team I'm already sort of established with, step 0 is get time on the calendar with them. Doesn't need to be super long, but set up a one-on-one to do introductions, sort of grease the wheels socially, right? Exchange sort of like some basic get to know you stuff. And then I have sort of a punch list that I'm trying to get through to establish like what I think of as an effective baseline for the relationship. And so I'm trying to say, please give me feedback. I'm going to be grateful if you come to me telling me that something I'm doing is not working as well as it could. Like, I will not take offense. And that, I think that's super important for me to not be naive, where I could be more effective, because people are afraid, or it comes as anonymous feedback at the end of a yearly cycle. Oh, someone said you sometimes do X or don't do Y very well, and that's not useful. What I want is someone to come to me directly. I've probably had this conversation with you at some point. Like, just tell me, if I can be better, just tell me how, help me understand. I want to do the best I can. That also, I've found, sets the person on the other side of the table up to say, oh, okay, if that's your posture, put me down for that as well. Let me know if there's something I can do to be more effective. And so now we've got a two-way relationship, a channel of communication where we can be honest, because we're both trying to do the best that we can for our team and our organization. And then I dig into sort of this premise of I'm only gonna say requirements if it's really required. Anything else is just part of the current plan. And so what I want is for those partners, especially engineering and design, but it can extend out to other functions as well. I want them to never take what I'm giving them as sacred text, right? If I share a document with you that says, let's do A, B, and C, don't take it as fact, because maybe that's not what we should do. Like, that's the current state of the plan, but plans can change. So ask questions. And what I'm always trying to put forward is sort of answering the why question. That's either going to be a problem we're trying to solve for the user, or for sort of the business mechanics of how our product is working for our business, or it's going to be some kind of opportunity in the market, some sort of hole that we can fill for customers or users. And so I'm going to focus on really getting crisp about that this is the problem we're solving, or this is the opportunity we're pursuing. And I'm going to try to paint that picture as vividly as I can. And then how we solve that is much more sort of rough draft state. If you've got a better idea, let's hear it. If that's going to take 3 months to develop, or it's going to create a bunch of tech debt, let me know that. We need to be eyes open on all of that stuff, and let's work together towards a plan to address the problem or the opportunity we're trying to pursue. So I'm trying to set all of that context with those partners really from day one, or at least week one.
I was reading some information on your website about what you do and how you do it. there was an instance at night that you mentioned when you got promoted to manage APIs, you went and actually took JavaScript classes and took a lot of technology classes to have more effective communication with the developers at that time. How necessary is that, right? In terms of from a product, because some product managers are not necessarily technical from a developer standpoint. How crucial or like how necessary is that?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on the product. As a sort of true across the board, I think of being more technical as a product person as like typing faster. Like no one would argue that it's a universal skill of product management to type fast, but no one ever wished they didn't type as fast as they do. Like it's handy to be able to type really fast. Can you be an effective product manager if you type really slowly? Absolutely. So I think across the board, regardless of the role, you'll never wish you were less technical, but for certain roles, it's far less valuable than for other roles. And that role where the product was developer facing, I felt like it felt like I was working with both hands tied behind my back and my eyes closed to not be able to sort of see the product from the perspective of a programmer. It almost as if, well, you're going to be the product manager for a mobile app, but you've never used a touch screen and you've never used and you don't have fingers and you can't like it. Once you start to like say, okay, well, you don't have any sense of what it's like to use this, it just turns into saying like, we need to be able to do X, go do it. I don't know. Right. So it sort of disengage. If you can't sit in the seat of the user, then you're really sort of like you're flying without any of your systems online. You're just like looking out at the clouds and hoping you don't hit the ground.
I think that's a major key, what you just said, and I love it. And I want to dive into that because that's a really good type of lesson learned that new product managers, or as you mentioned, the single developer working on an app who has to take on multiple roles as a product manager can understand, or the person who has a new great fintech idea. I want to really emphasize what you just said because I think it's extremely important for everyone to get. You have to sit in the seat of your end user. Whether that end user, so that end user is a developer, right? And you're building a platform of APIs so they can leverage. How would you know how effective your product will be if you don't view it in their perspective? In order to view it in their perspective, you have to get more technical in that realm. If your end user is a banker, right? If you don't understand the business of their particular department and how they're going to use it, how effective would your solution be? Now, in certain instances, when you're building these types of applications, it's not like you said, I can't go just get a book and say, okay, this is what the end user does, especially when you start getting into B2B, like for banks or for certain insurance business. I mean, these are just examples, but it's almost like you have to actually be in it to understand it. And that being in it sometimes takes years and years of working that process and understanding it. The development side seems a lot more straightforward. I just took a class. I work with some developers. I understand this. How does that challenge work on the business side of stuff?
Yeah, it is. I think it's the exact reason why it's fairly common to see new companies come from people who have been in a particular industry because they were in a seat to see, or they've been, maybe it's not the industry, but they have sort of regardless of industry, they've been the customer, right? So if you say, we're going to start a payroll service and it's going to work all these new ways, that probably comes from a place of, we've seen how miserable it is to try to run payroll with existing vendors. And so we know what a company of our size, like maybe you were some sort of finance person, or maybe you were running a small business, and it's like you have this insight from the customer perspective of these are all the problems that no one's solving. Or it might be that you have an expertise in a specific industry, right? Like a common example I use is, if you're going to work on QuickBooks, the bookkeeping product, it's probably going to be helpful to know a bit about accounting. Like it might be really helpful to have done bookkeeping or accounting, right? So, and if you don't have that sort of on your side, then it becomes similar to the way I went out to learn programming so I could sort of sit in that seat myself. You need to figure out some way to get a feel for that, and how you do that's going to depend on the situation. If there are folks inside of your company, like, if it's one of those internal products, then you can go sit with those people, say, hey, let's just take a couple hours and like, let me watch you work. Sorry that I'll interrupt with questions. I just want to understand what's going on. You could do it through interviews. Interviews are a big facet of the jobs to be done framework. And I think that can be really useful, where the paradigm with jobs to be done is the classic example. No one wants a 2-inch drill bit. They want a 2-inch hole. And so, or, no one wants their stuff to go on a train. They want their stuff to get somewhere. And so teasing out, like, what is the moment of struggle that someone, whether it's a consumer or a person inside of a business, faces, where they have a job they need to accomplish and there's not a good way to do it, or there could be a much better way to accomplish that job to solve the problem and move on with their life. Understanding that job in great detail it would be another sort of framework or tactic to pull in, because once we understand, and that gets back to sort of that problem or opportunity framing, getting really crisp around this is what we want to accomplish is super valuable, because then we can pull in everyone's expertise and say, okay, if this is our target, what's the best way to hit the bullseye on that?
Look, absolutely love that answer. We have to take a brief moment for our sponsor, and then we'll be right back with more questions. I absolutely love this this whole thing. It's like it's so interesting. Let's get back to the sponsors, and I'll jump back in with additional questions. 1 second.
Are you an emerging fintech with a limited budget seeking more sales and partners? Introducing Strategic Generation, your partner in leveraging cybersecurity for sales and partner enablement. Fintechs often lose opportunities due to unsophisticated cybersecurity programs. That's where we come in. Strategic Generation assists with due diligence, security posture visibility, penetration testing, and on-demand virtual CISO services. We connect your systems to our partnered platform, and voila! Instant access to real-time diagnostics and compliance frameworks such as SOC 2 and PCI DSS. Gain the confidence of prospects and partners. Strengthen your cybersecurity program and drive success. Stop losing deals due to cybersecurity. Visit strategicgeneration.com and click on On-Demand CISO to connect with an expert.
And just like that, we are back. Dan, amazing conversation. This is actually our 158th show, and we never had someone talk about product management from a fintech perspective and just in general. So I was really looking forward to this show to really understand it. I think sometimes, before, right, it was like product management, but some people hear project management and sometimes get the two confused. because you could kind of then leverage both under the whole agile framework. And we need to get into backlogs and different things of that nature. I think that probably be a follow-up show. Consider you now a friend of the show. Question though. I'm an aspiring product manager or entrepreneur. And I have this idea for a FinTech concept. What advice can you give me in terms of developing that product?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of facets to it, but ultimately what the question to try to answer is, what's the fastest way to gain confidence that what you have in your mind is a fit for the market, right? And so it could be as, not commonly, but it could be as simple as we're gonna be more efficient somehow, and thus we're gonna beat everyone on price. So we're gonna come in and compete with Stripe. We're not gonna do anything really better than Stripe, but we're gonna charge half the fees to process payments. If you had a way to do that, then okay, that's a pretty straightforward value proposition. People generally like to pay less for things, right? It could though be much more complicated, where you say, I think this kind of product that no one is making would be a big hit. And now it's a lot more, there's a lot bigger question to answer as to, is there a way to successfully bring this to market? And it starts with, do people want this? Is this really solving a problem that people are willing to pay for to solve? And so what is, we talked about the PDF that just sort of did as pretty of a job as it could of outlining the results of some SQL queries as like a way to test, is this a thing we should do? Whatever's the lightest weight way to put, I hear stories of folks, they'll say, I just kind of spent evenings and weekends and any time that I could trying to set up 20-minute calls with people that fit a certain description, or we're in a certain role, or we're in a certain industry, talking to them, hearing about their problems. Just maybe I'm showing them mock-ups, maybe I'm whatever is the lightest weight way to get to a sense of confidence. Okay, this isn't just a thing that sounds good to me, but this is a thing that sounds good to the people who would need to use it. And if we can understand their willingness to pay for that, that's even better, right? And so I think small and early are sort of the keys, because if you're on the totally wrong direction, the less time and money that you can spend learning you're headed in the wrong direction, the better, right? What you don't want to do is make an 18-month plan. There are cases where that's happened, right? Like OpenAI, obviously, like the biggest thing in the world right now. They spent some number of years without ever putting anything into market, but that's like the exception. That's a weird thing. They're doing some totally new field of technology. For most things, it's like, how quickly can we get something in front of somebody and learn something?
So interesting, because I'm a hip hop fan, and it's a rap line that J. Cole said. He said, the good news is you came a long way. The bad news is you went the wrong way. That's what I just thought about when you said that. We have a comment from Jose Coralino. Let's go. He says, right. Is there product market fit? Gap, true need. Maybe the first step is understanding product market fit.
Yeah. And that's a puzzle that you're trying to put together over time. And I think that really changes so much. And I would say you probably don't, it's typically not a great idea to hire a dedicated product person before you've reached that point where we have something, people will pay for it, we know how to sell it, right? Like ideally, I think you probably want to keep it to the founder or the founding team as long as you can, because one, smaller teams are faster. It's a huge, I call it the headcount fallacy, the notion that we're going to add more people to go faster. and another time we can dig into why, but it's fat. The smaller team is faster, and so fast is really good at this stage. And then the other thing is it's cheaper if you can have sort of the founder CEO playing that role of talking to people, driving the direction of development, and pivoting quickly. That is a much more efficient way to get to the point where really it's like a turning point when you say, we have a thing, people will pay for it, and they are paying for it. Now we're gonna say, how do we grow it, right? Like, we know we can sell it, but how can we sell more? That's sort of the turning point of product market fit, where we know we've got a business that can grow. And now the game is pulling the best levers to grow the fastest and sort of the most effectively. And so that, I think, is the turning point where the product management function makes the most sense, because you've got sort of a lane to put someone in and say, here's what we're doing, let's go faster. So yeah, I think that is critical.
Wow. I think you just gave an idea for another show regarding, why are smaller teams faster? So I'm definitely interested in that. We have someone from Twitch asking, what exactly is he talking about? So this video will be available on YouTube, LinkedIn, and so forth. Please go to the Tech Behind FinTech, and we will you'll get a recording of it. We were talking about concept to launch the FinTech Product Market Journey. So if you are just coming into this chat, you can watch the recording. It'll go live. So visit the Tech Behind FinTech, and also would appreciate if you visit the Tech Behind FinTech, please drop in your email so we can be in touch. Dan, amazing show. Very enlightening hour. You're officially, dude, you're a friend of the show. You're our first product manager we have on. So anytime something happens in product management, want to gain some more, you're one of the people I'm gonna call upon first. So with my guest, I want to give you the stage right now. You can talk about whatever you want, how people get in contact with you, also about product intuition and so forth. So I'm going to step off and give you the stage.
Thanks, Namdi. It's been great to catch up. So productintuition.com. You can get to my blog that way. You can find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect, and you can subscribe if you want to catch the writing that I do on product management, a little bit recently on decentralized identity technology stuff. It's very nichey, but I'm trying to keep the more general product content coming as well as I'm doing that. So thanks again, Namdi.
Guys, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for all of the comments. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for viewing it. Whether you view it live or you view it a day from now, a week from now, or a year from now, you'll hear me saying thank you. We really appreciate your viewership and your support. As Dan mentioned, for further questions around product, you can get in contact with him, and you can visit Product Intuition. Stay tuned for our show every Friday live, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be here, same bat channel. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch. More importantly, you can find us on techbehindfintech.com. Thank you very much for watching it. All of you have a very awesome and an exciting and spectacular weekend, even if it's snowing in your particular region like it's in mine. Still make it great. Dan, on that note, we are out, and I'll talk to you offline, man. Great show. A lot of information. Loved it.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.